So someone asked me, I was having, I think it was lunch. It was about 5 years ago. I was having lunch with somebody new in fundraising, and he said, "What is the future of fundraising?" He said, "What is the future of fundraising?" And just like most fundraisers, like I'm sure a lot of you in this room, I just shot from the hip and sort of answered the question. And I answered the question within the context of, I don't know that he was really asking me this question, but I said, I answered it within the context of the fundraising profession itself. And my answer to him was in 3 parts. And that's what I want to, those of you who are going to spend the hour with me here, and then you're going to come back, I hope you'll come back after the break and spend the second hour with us. But I answered the question in 3 ways. And the first way was, as I said, that the future of the fundraising profession will reveal an increasing divide between those who can accomplish their goals and those who cannot. I'll repeat that again. The fundraising profession will reveal an increasing divide between those who can accomplish their goals and those who cannot. And then I continued to say, and I had to start writing this stuff down because I was sort of surprising myself. I said, that divide that I'm talking about, that divide between those who can accomplish their goals and those who cannot, will be revealed in the ability for the fundraising professional themselves to know and understand themselves and the organizational culture in which you operate. It will have very little to do, your success in this line of work, with an increasing level of regularity, will have much less to do with the donors that we're all fascinated with and paying attention to and studying and understanding. But your success in this line of work will have more to do with your ability to understand yourself and the organizational culture in which you operate. And then the third thing I said, which is essentially the thesis of the book that you all have in your bag, that I hope you will go home and read, is that fundraising professionals, like all human beings who have been tasked with fundraising or a task of any sort, will always attempt, just because of who we are as human beings, not because of who we are as fundraising professionals or because we're in the nonprofit sector, but we will always attempt to do fundraising at an arm's length. And I am on a mission to combat arm's length fundraising, because I think fundraising now finds itself in what I call its messy adolescence. The fundraising profession is not a profession that has been around for decades. It's been around for decades, but it has not been around for centuries like some of our other professions, and it's still working its way through a messy adolescence. And a lot of the people that stand in front of groups like yours are a lot older than I am, and they're heavily invested, quite frankly, in a younger, more infantile, child sort of understanding. If we sort of see fundraising as sort of moving through a maturing process, they're heavily invested in that. And so I ruffle feathers when I get in front of audiences like yours, especially if there's a group of consultants in the room, because if you're heavily invested in the way that fundraising has always been, it's not going to work that way in any profession that matures, just like we as individuals mature. We'll mature through different phases, and that's where I think fundraising is right now. And I think some of the insecurities that I see, if you pick up my book when you go home tonight, I hope you'll pick it up and maybe just read the first couple of chapters. But I title the book, I subtitle the book, honest but hopeful critique of contemporary fundraising. It is a very honest and frank critique of where fundraising finds itself today. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that today. But I hope you'll go home and read it. And the second half of the book, while the first half of the book is rather critical and very honest, the second half of the book is much more hopeful. And what I get most excited about is a chapter, the second to the last chapter, is a chapter called A Tale of Two Ryans, and I suspect there's a number of Ryans or Rhondas in the room. I get sometimes people point out, why did you decide to have this 2 men? And I just coincidentally, it's 2 Ryans that I got to know. But what is particularly intriguing to me about these young Ryans is that I think we have young people that are coming into the profession at a particular time where the things that some of us took decades to learn, they're learning in colleges and in grad schools and they're looking at the messiness that we've had to navigate, those of us who have been in this profession for decades. And they're honestly coming into the work with far fewer hang-ups than some of us who've been around for a little bit while longer than they have. I'm probably what I consider myself one of those last few that come into the profession hesitant to use the word fundraiser. Those of you who've been in the field for some time know that 10 and 20 years ago we hesitated to introduce ourselves as fundraising professionals. One of you in this room, and you know who you are, very proudly got on my podcast and said, "I am a fundraiser." I am a fundraiser, and you're perfectly fine with that particular identity, are you not? Perfectly fine. And that's the exciting thing. But for those of us who've been around a little longer, the argument that I make in this particular chapter of the book is that if we don't get our heads wrapped around that, it's not going to be ageism that's going to prevent us from getting jobs. It's just going to be our confidence to do the job really well. Because there's going to be somebody 10 years or 20 years younger. It's not because they're cheap. It's because they're determined to get to the lunch table and do the job really well. And they know and understand what arm's length fundraising is, what my accusation is. They know and understand that, like these two Ryans. So I said, my answer to this gentleman's question was, how are we going to know? And I said, you're going to know and understand yourself, and you're going to understand the organizational culture in which you operate. I despise PowerPoint, because if I put PowerPoint up behind me, I end up reading things. My ADD just gets really out of control. And so I worked with a graphic designer a number of years ago after I finished grad school, and I created these training cards, and we use these training cards with boards of directors. And so I'll do a planning retreat, for example, and I'll actually, over 2 days, we'll actually put all of these cards. You're seeing the first two. If you come back for the second session, you'll get the other two. But I want to walk you through both of these cards really quickly. I want to walk you through it so quickly that we can spend the second half of this time sort of really beginning to allow you to unpack it and ask questions so that you can leave here and own it. Because part of what I think the fundraising, as we're maturing through this sort of messy adolescence that I'm talking about, I think what is defined as expertise is going to change. It's going to change, and it's largely reflected on things like this card, because you can be 2 or 3 years in and get a really practical understanding of what fundraising looks like at a systems level, which is essentially what we're going to work through right here on these two cards. You can get your head wrapped around this really quickly, and you can be light years ahead of somebody who's 10, 20, 30 years into the profession because you refuse to embrace some of the logic that's on this card. This first card here, this is not rocket science here on the front of this card. This right here, this systems model right here on the front, I want to walk you through it really quickly. This systems model, systems thinkers will basically call this shifting the burden to the intervener. It actually goes by 2 names. I'm not going to tell you what the second name is. I'm just going to tell you what the first name is. I'm going to let you figure out what the second name is. But shifting the burden to the intervener, this systems loop. Anybody ever seen this systems loop before? So this systems loop, these are feedback loops that they all interact. And you notice that we're not talking about a linear process here. We're talking about loops that interact and sort of come back and talk to each other and all that sort of stuff. But the problem to be solved is that we need more money. We need more money, and generally we turn to the north, and we basically pursue what I call trivial gifts. And trivial gifts are very necessary. So they're sort of the double-edged sword. And if I had all day to really unpack trivial gifts, some people don't like the fact that I use the word trivial gift. It sort of offends people. It offends the sector. It offends people in nonprofit work. How dare you suggest that there's such a thing as a trivial gift? We could do a really simple exercise. We could all acknowledge that there's an organization that we have given a trivial gift to. But to do that also acknowledges that there's organizations that we care a great deal about, and we've given very meaningful and significant gifts. But most of your organizations, and I say most very assertively, most of your organizations are entrenched in a cycle of basically generating trivial gifts. Your development plan may say, I understand your development plan may say special events, direct mail, grant writing, and whatever you can accomplish on the web. But what is it about those particular 4 methodologies that's all common, regardless of how diversified we think that is? It's very arm's length. You're maintaining an arm's length relationship with all of those donors, and I'm here to tell you that I understand I'm not the first guy or the first gal, if I was a gal. I'm not the first person to stand in front of you and point out that those 4 particular methodologies aren't necessarily the most effective in terms of generating the most meaningful and significant gifts. Most of you are not going to argue with me about that. But the thing about those 4 particular methodologies is not only do they keep you at an arm's length, but they undermine all of your opportunities to basically know and understand what it is the marketplace is going to pay you for 10 and 20 and 30 years out, because all of those methodologies are going to become more automated, more digitized. They don't need you in this room nor me to do that sort of stuff. What you and I, as fundraising professionals, the value we create is the ability to sit across the table and have a meaningful conversation with an individual, raise expectations, and focus on subsequent gifts. But if you all, just like myself, keep signing on for job descriptions that say nothing but basically initial gifts, you're undermining your opportunities to develop expertise. Expertise is the ability to see patterns. I talk about this also in the second half of the book. And a lot of us are so entrenched in those 4 methodologies, and all we see, the only data points we see in those 4 methodologies are basically the size of a gift and the date of a gift. And therefore, you can't see the patterns of giving, the meaningfulness that's happening in the lives behind those gifts. But when you sit down and you have conversations with these people and you get to know and understand what's going on in their lives, you begin to understand the narrative that's happening in their, as it's being expressed through their giving. That's what expertise is. That's what your employers are going to pay for in the future. Read Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. Anybody read Deep Work? Deep Work is essentially what we're going to talk about here at the end of the session, is basically my middle lane. But the marketplace no longer values shallow work. It no longer values shallow work. And if you want to know what shallow work is in the fundraising profession, it's those 4 things that I just said to you. And I know that might ruffle some of your feathers and it might hurt your feelings. And the reason why it hurts your feelings is because for 30 to 40 to 50 years, the fundraising profession has defined our expertise in those basic 4 domains, those 4 methodologies. And so we've got our professional identities wrapped up in methodologies, not in the work with which we're doing, and we're not finding meaning in it. Every one of you, if I did a personality assessment, if I really got to know and understand your implicit motives are those things that operate below the surface. Your spouses, your partners, other people that know you would know better than you would what your implicit motives are. A lot of you are doing work that you don't even want to do. You're doing it because basically what the fundraising profession has done is you said, I want to get into the nonprofit sector. It's meaningful work. And then they said, you can do fundraising. You can be really friendly. You can use that that friendliness and the ability to build relationships. I'm sorry, you're not going to build relationships by doing direct mail and special events. You're not. You're setting yourselves up. But we need to do special events, direct mail. We need Giving Tuesday. All of those things are necessary, and I'm going to show you how that works. But anyway, so we get stuck in that top loop. And a lot of your organizations are stuck in that top loop, and they can't get into the bottom loop. The reason they can't get into that bottom loop is because what systems thinkers would basically call this side effect loop. And this side effect loop is the side effect that happens when the shallowness of the work that you're involved with, the work that you're doing, the shallowness of the work that's happening with arm's length fundraising, and quite frankly, just the inability for that particular type of fundraising to generate an adequate margin to therefore justify your role on the payroll, consequently they can't pay you more. If you're stuck in this loop up here, which is largely designed, this top loop here in any system is designed for volume and efficiency. That's what it's designed for. And if you want to be a part of that system, so be it. But this system is designed like a machine, the top loop here. It's designed for volume and efficiency. That's what direct mail, that's what special events. We're herding people into rooms at the greatest efficiency, get as many transactions as we can. We've now managed to consolidate it onto a single day. Folks, what I could accomplish in a 12-year giving a direct mail campaign over 12 months can now be consolidated into a single day. And if you think that your organizations are going to continue to pay you, and they're going to pay you better to do work that can be automated and digitized and done at an arm's length long term, I don't think so. So you get going around this top loop, but your organizations can't get out of this top loop because this top loop throws off side effects. And most consultants who stand in front of groups like this are telling us that these side effects are actually our problem. They're not our problem. They're side effects of a deeper problem. Donor attrition and professional turnover are not our problem. And we've got gurus who've been doing this for a lot longer than I have, who are deeply entrenched in the older definition of what fundraising is, who are trying to basically say, how do we get people to stick around? I've got the Chronicle of Philanthropy interviewing me tomorrow, and I'm going to say, professional turnover is not our problem. Our problem is we don't have enough fundraising professionals who know how to discern whether or not their employers are setting them up to fail or to succeed. And if you're stuck in this top loop, you're being set up to fail. And then we're going to whine about the fact that you quit because this delay over here takes about 18 months. That's the average length of time. That's the average length of time that basically we say a fundraising professional takes before they quit. And the donor attrition is the other side effect. It's just the other side of the giving and receiving relationship. Are you following me here? It's just the other side of the giving and receiving relationship. The same meaningfulness that you want in your work, which is the reason you showed up in the nonprofit sector to begin with, the same meaning is the same thing your donors are looking for. It's called psychosocial integration. It's the ability to actually do things that sort of ground us in our society. Psychologists have been talking about this for years. But the thing about this side effect loop is that it undermines the logic of the bottom loop. And the bottom loop is just what we know to be mature fundraising operations. What do mature fundraising operations know? They know that Giving Tuesday matters, but what mature fundraising operations know is that the donor who gave you $125 on Giving Tuesday somebody needs to pick up the phone the day after and offer to take them out to lunch and ask them for 5 times as much. And everybody, 80% of the people aren't going to give you that. That's perfectly fine, but 20% will. 20% will. And then amongst those few, there's a select few that will even continue down the path a little further. Now that's a really quick run through of what's going on in this card. But I told you as I started to unpack this card, and I know there's a lot of things on this card, but I told you that there was 2 names to this card. What am I describing? I'm describing shifting the burden to the intervener, which is basically the idea that organizations, enterprises, individuals are always shifting it to the new donor, the new idea, the new product, the new solution, whatever it is. We typically refer to that top loop as a quick fix. But what's the other name? What is the other name that systems thinkers might refer to this particular model right here? Any guesses? Yes, ma'am. Long-term versus short-term, right? That works. But the top loop actually will work long-term. It'll just only work for a select few. But what's the heavier, more sort of in-your-face? I don't like using it. I like my audience to use it because I've learned that if I'm already big and bold and in your face and all that sort of stuff. But if I have to own this word before you own it, it's like I scare you out the door. You won't come back for the second session. What's the other word? Yes, ma'am. It's not lazy. Come on. What is it? Yes, ma'am. No. What do we call quick fixes?
Easy way
Easy, yeah. What do quick fixes oftentimes evolve into? Systems thinkers call this addiction. Your organizations are addicted. Your organizations are addicted to cheap, shallow, low-risk fundraising. And the problem with that is that anytime an organization, just like an individual, an organization can have addictive tendencies just like an individual. The problem with that is that we love to do rationalizing and externalizing of our problems. Any of you, I'm sure most of you have had some interaction in your lifetime with somebody who's an addict, and you know that they like to externalize their problems. They rationalize their problems. That's what the side effect loop likes to do. Most of your organizations are absolutely convinced that it's your donors that are the problem, that Trump is your problem, that the economy is your problem. No, your problem is your organization is not designed. Your organization is not designed in such a way where on Giving Tuesday, you have it capped volume at such a level where you all can pick up the phone and start taking people out to lunch. Starbucks knows how to raise money better than you do because Starbucks knows that they only want so much volume to come through the door, because if too many people come through the door, they can't convert those into long-term customers. And so you've got Giving Tuesdays and any other number of things that you like to do on your calendar that are so high volume that and you're exhausted with it by the end by whatever it is you're doing. And you all are signing on for job descriptions that say exactly what I'm talking about. Your jobs should start on the day after Giving Tuesday, not on or leading up to Giving Tuesday. This top loop, there are enterprises, there are companies in our world that thrive in the top loop, But what type of companies are they? Who are the thrivers? Who are the people, the enterprises, the companies, the for-profit enterprises that thrive on volume and efficiency in the top loop? McDonald's. Who else did I hear? Amazon. And there's one more that I usually hear. Walmart. What are the accusations? What are the accusations that we generally throw at Walmart and Amazon's and McDonald's? What's that? They're impersonal, sure, so we're describing direct mail, but what else are they? What do we describe? What do we essentially, I'm sorry? Monopolizers, okay. Cheap, again, direct mail. What else do we accuse them of?
Going against small business.
Right, undermining the small shops. Ultimately, we accuse them of exploitation. The top loop is a machine. Machines are designed to exploit. You all are being exploited because you're naive, because you don't understand that the machine is designed to exploit your value and the value of your donors, and you're signing on for it. And what I'm saying is, and remember what I started with, the Ryans of the world are figuring this out sooner and faster than you are, and realizing that Giving Tuesday is perfectly fine, but if I don't pick up the phone the day after Giving Tuesday, I'm not going to satisfy the expectations of my boss, because Giving Tuesday will not generate an adequate margin to accomplish my goals. Am I right? But when Ryan picks up the phone, he knows that not only will he raise the expectation for his donors, but he will also raise the expectations for himself, because he's not getting to that gift that's 5 times, 10 times larger than the gift that he got on Giving Tuesday until he gets to a lunch table and has the audacity to set the expectation a little higher. That's deep work. That's what your employers are going to pay for. 10 years out, I bet you, 10 years out, most of the organizations that are represented in this room will not employ people in what I call the top lane. They will not employ people to basically do direct mail, They will not pay people to do special events. They will not pay people to write grants. And they will not pay people to do what can be automated on the internet. Will that mean that that sort of stuff will go away? Not at all. Not at all. That stuff's not going to go away. It's absolutely necessary. We will always need to generate the first gift. We will always need to do that. But if you understand sociology and you understand the marketplace, and if you sort of look through history, the superstar effect plays out in those top loops or in the top lanes. And so your employers are going to start getting smarter and smarter, and they're going to realize, I don't need to pay somebody to do special events because I can outsource that to the woman who knows how to do my special event and 25 others, and I don't have to have that person on the payroll. And similarly, I can outsource everything digital to someone else because they can do it for me, and they can do it for 25 other organizations, if not 25, 150, the numbers. It's called the superstar effect. Go look it up. Rosen was the guy who was talking about this in the 1970s. This superstar effect plays through our economy all the time. Your job descriptions 10 years out will look like major gifts officers. I think a lot of you want to be major gifts officers, but you were not originally handed job descriptions that look like major gifts officers because you started in the profession at a time when new donor acquisition looked like the way to go. Your job descriptions need to say subsequent gifts on them. I tell people all the time, I was in New York City the other day talking to a gentleman that I coached him into his new job 18 months ago. If you want to discern who to go work for, sit down in that interview and discern whether or not your employer knows that new acquisition is designed to acquire the friend, not to move the mission. That's what it's designed to do. It's what it's always designed to do. And again, Starbucks knows that better than most of our nonprofits do. Starbucks loses $14 on every first cup of coffee that they sell to the first customer. There's nothing wrong with that. They make huge, extraordinary margins on every subsequent cup of coffee. Your organization and your job descriptions need to reflect that. So that's all real heavy. This guy just punched us in the gut, and I don't even know if I like this guy. But there is a solution. So if you own this, usually I spend 90 minutes on each side of this. They've given me an hour to do each side. But these 3 lanes are essentially playing out in all of your organizations. These 3 lanes are playing out in your organizations. That top loop, if you get too much into that top loop, is essentially the top lane. You need the top lane. Gerald Panis Gerald Panis said for decades, he pointed out the idea, he was referring to a campaign that played out at Harvard, that several of you, most of you, many of you probably heard this story, but essentially they did a study that basically traced the $1 million gifts on a recent capital campaign at Harvard all the way back to their first gift. And it originated with a $100 donation. That's the top loop, that's the top lane. I'm saying your organizations need those. I'm just saying they're not going to pay you to secure them. That's the top lane. That's the top lane. That's the initial gift. Your organizations need to know and recognize how to surrender the top lane, in large part to either outsourced individuals or volunteers. If you're a small shop, the reason you're not surrendering the top loop, the top lane, the reason you're not surrendering the top loop has very little to do with your desire to raise money, and it has a lot to do with your desire to feel like you're in control. A lot of you are working for control freaks that don't want to allow the top loop to be surrendered to highly capable volunteers who can do all sorts of crazy shit. We admire, you all admire, you envy. You have board members who every time you come into a board meeting, they're saying things to you like, how do we get the benefit of Giving Tuesday? How do we get the benefit of Ice Bucket Challenge? How do we get the benefit of what's the Red Nose campaign? You know how you get the benefit of those sort of ideas? Is you surrender control to people other than yourselves. Because most of those ideas, go read Henry Tim's book where he describes how Giving Tuesday works. Within a year, so before they even had Giving Tuesday year 2, they already had organizations in other parts of the world calling it other things, putting other colors on it, creating other hashtags, putting it, all this sort of different stuff with it. And whereas a control-driven culture would sue would basically send cease and desist letters and sue these people for doing other things with our ideas. The idea was to put it out in the world and let it take off. Now we know where Giving Tuesday started. We can largely credit Henry and his colleagues for finding that. But we don't know where this ice bucket challenge sort of concept started. You can go out on the web and you can find theories about where it started. But the point is that if you want the benefit of what is essentially called emergence in a system, emergence is the idea of sort of relinquishing control, not being so designed for predictability, not being overly whelming concerned about efficiency. But if you can allow your volunteers to assume the responsibility for the top lane, you don't know what kind of crazy things they'll do. And you'll create extraordinary efficiencies within your organization. But most of your organizations are not about raising money. They're about maintaining a sense of control. And why is it that this top lane has to maintain a sense of control? Why is it that we have to maintain a sense of control when it comes to special events and Giving Tuesday? I'm asking. Fear of what? Missing an opportunity, maybe. Perception of fear, the fear and perception of what? Yes, right. If I kept unpacking that, eventually we would get to the reality that the top lane is oftentimes what is most visible. It's what the world sees. Oh my, if it messes up, if it fails, if the amount of money we raised last year in this damn event isn't more, if we don't raise more money in this event this year, right, than we did last year, we'll look like complete failures. Am I right? How many of you are working for that organization where you're taking you're working for organizations where you're taking donors who don't give a flying flip about your special event? I've got a client in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. His 3 largest donors, he insists that the contributions basically show up at the event, and for 3 years that I've been working with them, the donors never show up. Your most passionate, most committed individuals don't show up for your events. But because your events are so darn seen, you can't dare let them look like they failed. How many of you have heard of Jeffersonian dinners? Jeffersonian dinners are absolutely brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. Harvard is teaching, it's not an idea I come up with, and it's not an idea that she came up with, but go find Jennifer McRae's book, The Generosity Network, where she's got an entire chapter on Jeffersonian dinners. You know why Jeffersonian dinners are going to ruffle the feathers of your organization? Is because you can only put 12 to 15 people in a Jeffersonian dinner. You can't do it efficiently. Your boss is not going to feel like he or she is in control. And you can't invite everybody to come. And so somebody's going to come, I work with a lot of private schools, so you're going to have somebody come knocking on your door and say, oh, why didn't I get invited to that particular event? You know what? We can't put more than 12 or 15 people in the chairman's living room. Why don't you host another one? But you're so entrenched in doing things in the top loop or in the top lane based on volume and efficiency, does not generate the yields you want. And then you come into a room like this and you ask questions like, why don't I get paid better? 75% of the people in this room, if not more, are women, is my guess. You are all complaining about the idea that you're underpaid, but you're also tolerating a system that's not designed for extraordinary returns. So have the audacity. I understand that women are not very well paid, but go read John Joss' theory that's coming out of NYU. It's called systems justification theory. Systems justification theory says a really simple idea, and that is that the systems, those that are most negatively impacted by the system, are also the least likely to question it. There should be 12 of you standing up here, and I should be in your seat. But I'm the type of guy who doesn't struggle from systems justification theory because I have the audacity to question the system. And you all keep taking on these job descriptions that are setting you up for failure. And 75-80% of you happen to be women in this particular line of work. It has nothing to do with your gender. It has to do with the fact that you're in a system that's designed to exploit. So if you weren't women, and we were all a bunch of fellas, the system would still work the same way, and a bunch of us guys would be complaining about the same thing, believe it or not. But the amazing thing and the opportunities about the fact that we are 75-80% women in this line of work is that most of you, all of the skills that you need in the middle lane, you guys are probably thinking, oh wow, he just tackled that particular issue in like 2 minutes. All the skills that you need to do lane 2 really well are the skills that I learned from my mother, not my father. The skills that I need to know how to sit down across the table and be vulnerable and know how to listen, right? Isn't that what major gift fundraising really is the ability to just sit down and listen? But we've designed fundraising to feel like it's in control. I have a very simple exercise. We'll talk about it we'll talk about it in the second session. I hope you'll come back. You'll read about it in my book. But I use a concept called deliberate practice. I use a concept to train up development officers called deliberate practice. The remarkable thing about deliberate practices is that it enables us to create remarkable levels of performance and remarkable levels of understanding expertise because we recognize the simple patterns and the way things play out. If you look at the cover of my book, there's chess pieces on the cover of that because we've been studying the science of expertise for decades. It started in the 1940s, and they were studying chess players. Here's the reality of expertise in this line of work. I can give any one of you, I can give a 26-year-old a list of current donors and tell him or her, call those people, say thank you. When you meet with them, you can only meet with them, say thank you, and only ask questions. And I guarantee within 12 months she'll be raising more money. But that's a very vulnerable, unpredictable sort of place to be. That's what the messy middle is all about. I get kicked out of Facebook groups that consist primarily of consultants in this fundraising space. I've literally been kicked out of 2 of them. Literally, I mean, I'm not kidding. And it's because I don't think the fundraisers are the problems. I think the organizations are the problems. I think the large associations are the problems. And don't get me started on the software companies. I mean, who benefits the most from the top loop? Who benefits the most from this top loop? This loop is based on volume and efficiency. Some of us were freaking out on social media when Salesforce.org all of a sudden recently got acquired by its own company to become a for-profit enterprise. I've been saying for 10 years that Blackbaud doesn't give a damn about all these small startup CRM companies. The only 2 companies that are paying attention to each other are Blackbaud and Salesforce, and all they want you to do is get stuck and absolutely addicted to the top loop. That's it. And you all keep signing on for these job descriptions. But back to expertise. I can hand you a list. Your name is Claire? Claire, I can hand you a list of 100 donors and say to you, only say thank you, take them out to lunch. Take them out to lunch and ask questions. But that requires a degree of vulnerability, largely on the part of your boss, not on your part. Because my guess is, Claire, and I don't even know you, but the fact that you're sitting in this room, my guess is you'd actually enjoy those lunch tables, right? Yeah. That's my guess. And that's my guess about a lot of you. But the idea that some of you in this room, the idea that I would say that some of you need to learn how to become major gifts officers is like, no way. Because your professional identities are stuck in the top loop. You've been convinced. Claire, do you work in the top loop? I'm guessing you don't. I don't know. You work for Shauna. You work in major gifts. Yes, you work for Shauna. Shauna gets this stuff. But Shauna, you're kind of what I'm talking about. You and I are sort of that edge that are sort of sitting in the midst of this messy adolescence. It's a lot of people who are basically 40 to 45 years old. I'm ruffling feathers in these Facebook groups because what I'm saying to these people is that you're an expert in the top loop. It's really easy to be an expert in the top loop because it is a science. It is a machine. Complicated machines are the top loop. But we're actually, those of you who are enlisting consultants, advisors, all those sort of people who come in and sell you things like feasibility studies. Feasibility studies in the age of the Me Too era, in an era when everybody else in our culture is saying transparency, right? When everybody's saying we ain't closing doors, all of these things don't need to be happening behind, curtains, and we're still selling feasibility studies. How about you just learn how to take people out to lunch and ask questions and have the audacity to raise the expectation for yourself and your donors? Any one of you can have the same conversations that you're paying. Some of your organizations will pay $100,000 to an outside consulting firm to do the work that you all ought to know how to do. We're talking about 5 questions. What are those 5 questions? It's in my book. Those 5 questions are basically the ability to say, what do you see the vision to be 5 years out? That's the first question that a feasibility person asks. What's the vision 5 years out? The second question is, what's your confidence in our executive, in our board, and in the strategic plan? But if you're working for a control freak boss who can't dare let you, Claire, go out into the field and ask such a question about Shauna, I can't let you do that. Talk about diminishing your role. The third question is how are we meeting or exceeding or not so much meeting your expectations? The fourth question is, which you should all be asking on your first meeting, is just tell me about the other organizations that you support. And the last question is there any one thing that we don't know? You learn how to ask those 5 questions. Don't pay some outside consulting group $100,000 to do a feasibility study for your organization. That's audacious. But as long as you do that, as long as you agree to let those outside groups come in, you're basically allowing them to put their expertise on loan with your organization. You're letting them put their expertise on loan. And as long as you're tolerating that actually we contract with all these outside sources here, look, folks, we have a lot of consultants out here in our world that like to exist in these outer lanes. They like the outer lanes because they're predictable, they're controllable. But you all need to become experts of the middle lane, which is the idea that you need to learn how to sit down and have lunch with people and raise the expectation past that initial gift. I created these cards so that you can go home and explain this to your boss. That's what these cards are designed to do. And you don't have to be as bold as I was. You don't have to be as in your face as I was. Who's sitting here saying, I can't believe what the hell that guy just said? And I don't believe anything that this card says. Who's that person? Anybody in this room that would be so bold and vulnerable to say that? Who owns this card like, wow, he just defined my organization? Okay, who thinks, so who of you that just raised your hand, you're looking at that card and you're saying, I'm going to go home, I'm going to explain this to my boss or my board. Who's looking at a part of this card and just, there's a piece of it that's just, you're still missing at a very high level? That's the question I need to hear first. Yes, ma'am.
One thing I have is like, I think there are a lot of budget implications. So you talk through kind of what you would recommend for somebody, for an organization that's moving more into the second half from a budget standpoint. I mean, like, do you hiring a major person specifically, or, I mean, one thing I'm thinking is you have to have a strong budget that allows you to take people out.
Right. But, Corey, I usually that's the you're not taking people out to lunch is my guess.
I'm actually not allowed.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
I hear control, right? Anybody in this room who routinely takes people out to lunch, usually I get that. If that's not the first question after I make this presentation, that's usually the second. How in the hell do we pay for that lunch? Anybody who routinely takes people out to lunch knows one thing, and what is that? What's that?
Pays for itself.
Well, that too.
So most of the time they pay.
The donor will pick up the check. I would bet that any donor that has been worth me taking out to lunch picks up the tab. But you asking that question suggests to me that you're so entrenched in the top lane or the top loop as an organization. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying to you, Corey, is that if your boss and your board won't let you get into the middle lane, because my guess is you want to be really valued, and that's why you're in this sector, and you want to know how to sit across the table and do really great things, that if they won't let you do that, you need to go work for somebody else. Because you don't need to be asking that question. That's not, the answer to the question is the donor will pick up the tab. The donor will most often pick up the tab. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm coming from an organization where I'm the first development officer.
Yep, right.
And I've never been in development before.
Yep.
They saw potential in me from my previous role and bumped me up.
Yep.
So there's a lot of hesitancy to really push me out, into the donor pool.
Yeah.
To have these kind of conversations. And I guess my question is, how do I convince them that that's a smart move and is it a smart move?
There's two sides to that question. The first thing is that most organizations, most of us human beings think very linear. And so the way you think about fundraising as an organization is that you think that the initial gift is where you, the first development officer, ought to be focused. But if we can surrender control to those volunteers, we can say, go do crazy things on the possibility that you'll screw it up even, right? And your name? Kristen. So that Kristen, when that works, and it will generally work more than it won't, especially if you're doing simple things like Jeffersonian dinners. So create a top lane that can be driven by volunteers. But that's why at the beginning of lane 2, you notice that I call it the first fundraiser on the payroll. So we think so much in a linear way that we think the first lane, therefore the first fundraiser. But what organizations do, even organizations that have highly capable volunteers, oftentimes hire that development officer, and then you get that feuding that goes on between, am I the guru volunteer or am I the guru fundraiser, right? You've been in those organizations. And so you get this fighting going on. And what everybody's doing is you're creating a traffic jam in lane 1 is essentially what you're doing. But what I'm saying to you, because I'm advocating for you, I'm not advocating for your boss. I'm not advocating for some large association. I'm not advocating for, sure as hell not advocating for a software company. I'm advocating for you, and I'm saying your value is in lane 2, which is to say that you need to get a job description that says subsequent gifts on it. You follow me there? And when you do that, it doesn't have to be predictable. It doesn't have to be efficient. And that's what a lot of us don't have our sort of heads wrapped around, because historically we've seen job descriptions that say basically they're entrenched in new donor acquisition. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
You made a comment about the software companies getting the most benefit, especially at that time. I just want to push back on that a little bit, because I think there really is a benefit to those software companies also for helping to organize, especially when you're a large organization, to kind of keep, so you can kind of look back on history and kind of get an idea depending on how many donors that you're dealing with. So I think that there is a little bit of a benefit to them.
Peter Thiel wrote a great book called 0 to 1. And he talks about a complementary relationship between technology and what human beings do. I'm not dismissing the importance of CRMs, the ability to collect data, and the usefulness of technology. What I'm saying is I don't want you competing with it. And I also want you to be fully and completely aware of the fact that software companies are in business to make money. I'm not advocating. I didn't say that they're evil. I said I'm not advocating for them. But when I see, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but fortunately I own that videotape that he's making. But when I see the Center of Philanthropy at the university, at the Center of the thing in Indiana, what's that thing called? What is it? Center of Philanthropy? Is that what it's called? When I see that organization paired up with Blackbaud and paired up with MasterCard and Visa, it just makes me think a little bit. I mean, they're not, and when I see consultants, top consultants, standing in front of groups like you, who are all paired up with software companies, it just makes me think. So I understand what you're saying, and I need the data too, but if Claire has 120 names that Shauna gives her and says, go out and take these people out to lunch, what she's actually going to need is a spreadsheet, quite frankly, of up-to-date data. And as those relationships mature, and consequently the expectation is raised, she's not going to need some super sophisticated data. Because the data is what, and I mean, go read Newport's book. The ability to manage all this information is not going to go away. CRM companies are not going to go away. Claire will need that. But I'm just being real. And I'm advocating for the fundraiser, not the software company. Anybody else? Yes?
Can you talk more about some of those models here, opportunities for guessing off business successful to, a board, for example? What can we do to give them some of the time software that we might have, make them feel empowered?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way in which human beings sort of arrive at sort of their great, where they make the greatest impact. Everything that I'm doing with my clients is trying to sort of surrender that control to that volunteer. And I always ask the question, is it their idea? And I'm always trying to say to the client, I don't want to give you, I mean, your top lane's not going to change all that dramatically. You're still going to do galas and golf tournaments. I can't, you can do big events, small events, you can put things in the mail, all that sort of stuff. I'm not out there trying to reinvent what that is. I'm trying to surrender control to that volunteer. I don't think there's a whole lot of innovation that's going to happen in that top lane. I think we're still going to be doing events, 100 years from now. But what I think we need to really own up to, and I don't know if I'm answering your question terribly well, but I think we need to own up to that we're moving into a time period where it's never been easier to get the initial gift. It's never been harder to get the subsequent gift. I can get $10 from a young lady or a young man on their phone who swipes just like on Tinder or something. I can get that $10. That's the type of stuff you can do nowadays. And that's an initial gift. The magic of that is that I need to be responsive. If you look at the way that the marketplace is talking about this, the marketplace meaning we're not talking about nonprofit organizations. They're talking about how we as an economy and we as creators and builders of companies need to move away from efficiency and predictability, and we need to move to an era of responsiveness, which is the ability to respond to opportunities when they come to us, which is the reason why I don't like capital campaigns, which is the reason I don't like feasibility studies, because you're trying to take your biggest donors, your most generous people, and you're trying to put them into a predictable channel that they don't want to go in. And what you need to do is you need to have this is what the 3 lanes are trying to sort of articulate. When that opportunity shows up at your door, you need to be ready for it. And so how does this get back to your question? I think you need to let the idea be your volunteer's idea. If you want that top lane to begin to thrive, it's got to be their idea. One more question before I let him. One more question. Yes, sir.
All right, so in all the black box hating here.
Yeah.
No, but I'll ask this question. So we, my organization, we pay black box some to do some research in terms of finding, major gifts for them, and likelihood, that kind of thing. Now, that's a situation of outsourcing. So would you say that's a wise use of outsourcing as opposed to having like somebody in-house research, or would you say the better use of your money would be to pay somebody extra or bring somebody in to help out and actually say, here's a list of 100 people, why don't you call these people up and do your own research?
There's layer. I could go in all sorts of places with that. The problem I have with that sort of, I think that's I don't have a problem with sort of doing the well screening and all that sort of stuff. That's fine. But the problem with that is that you're taking a donor, oftentimes what's your name, I'm sorry? Alex, you're taking a donor in lane 1 and you're trying to skip the messiness of lane 2 in order to get the advantages of lane 3. But you've also got to be aware of what these companies are making money off of. The messiness in the middle is where all of you can shine, but nobody makes any money. The most money that I can make as a consultant or some sort of outside service provider in the middle lane is to coach you. Okay? So what they're trying to do, just like the software companies that are maximizing on lane 1, is that those wealth engine companies are maximizing on lane 3. So they're basically having you take the data that you gathered on Giving Tuesday and trying to get you to prematurely jump into lane 3, because that data is valid, it's accurate data, it's useful. But the question, Alex, you've got to ask yourself is does it actually do you any good with a donor that you don't even know? Have you taken that person out to lunch?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah,
exactly right.
That's a challenge. When you focus on those folks, can you get them to like agree? Is it accurate? Because can you get them to agree?
You see, Alex, you've got to be aware of yourself and know and understand that the majority of you in this room, and I'll end on this thought, you've got to understand that my guess is that most of you in this room are highly relational people. That's how you were designed. That's who you are as people. And you're not going to like the idea. It's working against your DNA. You're not going to like the idea of sitting down with a person that you just met and being expected to move them from $125 on Giving Tuesday to $1 million. And those of you who've experienced meaningful major gifts as a process know that there's any number of gifts in between that 125 and that million, and you could be a rock star at that, but you got to work for an organization that wants to let you do that. That's called the middle.